My name is Kendra Phillips. I am 31 years old. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone recorded a frantic voicemail from my father. He was standing at a luxury travel agency counter, his polished country club voice cracking with panic. The corporate credit card he tried to use for a $9,000 vacation deposit had just declined in front of the agent. He demanded I unlock the account. He called me selfish. But what my father failed to realize was that the guarantor signature securing that account belonged to me. I did not unlock the card. I listened to the voicemail, froze the account permanently, and sent him a single text message. It is only for family, remember. Before I take you back to the dinner where he said those exact words to my face, tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I want to know how far this story on QT Told Stories will travel. To understand why I left my father stranded without a cent to his name, you have to go back 3 days earlier to a seafood restaurant in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. The dining room smelled like drawn butter and expensive Pinot Grigio. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, adjusting his silk tie. My mother, Susan, sat next to him, picking at a crab cake. Across from me sat Vanessa, my older sister, swirling her wine glass. Vanessa ran a failing coastal boutique that survived entirely on family bailouts, but my parents treated her like a retail mogul. We were supposed to be discussing the upcoming summer itinerary. I took a sip of my iced tea and mentioned that I needed the final dates for the Amalfi Coast trip so I could submit my time-off request at the firm. I work as a senior corporate compliance officer in Wilmington. My schedule requires precision. My father stopped chewing. He set his fork down on the linen tablecloth. He looked at Susan, then at Vanessa. A slow, practiced smirk spread across his face. "We already booked the dates, Kendra," he said. I paused. I asked what he meant, considering I had not received any flight confirmations. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The smirk hardened into something sharp and deliberate. "It is a luxury trip, Kendra. It is only for family. Without you." Vanessa let out a sharp, genuine laugh. She did not even try to hide it. My mother looked down at her plate, offering a soft, pathetic smile that endorsed the cruelty without taking responsibility for it. They expected a reaction. They expected me to argue, to beg for my spot, or to storm out in tears so they could call me unstable. I did none of those things. In my line of work, you learn that emotion is a liability. Data is leverage. I looked at the three of them sitting there in their designer clothes, funded by the corporate entity I managed for them behind the scenes. Phillips Coastal LLC was a Delaware holding company established for tax advantages. My father liked the title of president, but he hated the paperwork. For 5 years, I had quietly managed the ledgers, reconciled the accounts, and secured the credit lines that kept their curated lifestyle afloat. I was the invisible scaffolding holding up their fragile ego. I nodded. I signaled the waiter, handed him a $20 bill for my iced tea, pushed my chair back, and walked out the front door. The coastal evening air hit my face, crisp and salty. I drove the hour north back to my townhouse in Wilmington in total silence. I did not cry. I calculated. 3 days passed. 3 days of radio silence from my family. They assumed they had won. They assumed I had accepted my place as the invisible, excluded daughter. Then on Tuesday, at 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with an automated fraud alert. $9,000 attempted at Rome Escapes Luxury Travel. I sat at my glass desk in my home office. I logged into the banking portal. I stared at the pending charge. My father was using the corporate line to fund the very trip he had excluded me from. I clicked decline. I clicked freeze all authorized user cards. Then I sent the text message. 10 seconds later, my phone screen turned into a waterfall of incoming calls from Richard. Panicked texts from Vanessa flooded in right behind his. I turned the phone on silent and poured myself a glass of water. The satisfaction was quiet and profound. But the calm did not last. 2 minutes later, a separate email notification arrived from the bank. It was an alert indicating a secondary, unauthorized attempt to wire a large sum directly from the LLC reserve account. My father was not just trying to buy plane tickets. He was draining the reserves. The townhouse in Wilmington offered a sanctuary of straight lines and quiet spaces. Unlike the chaotic coastal clutter of my parents' house down south, my environment operated on precision. I sat at my glass desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating the darkening room. On the screen, the secure banking portal for Phillips Coastal LLC loaded. Right at the top of the ledger, a bright orange flag highlighted a pending transaction. $9,000. The vendor was listed as Rome Escapes Luxury Travel. My father had not wasted a single minute. He left that seafood dinner, probably drove straight to the agency, and handed them the corporate platinum card. The card that carried his name on the plastic, but relied entirely on my Social Security number as the primary personal guarantor. He convinced me to sign that specific document 5 years ago. He framed it as a standard administrative formality necessary for Delaware tax structuring. He claimed my pristine credit score was merely a backup, a placeholder to secure better interest rates for the holding company. I knew better, but I signed it anyway. I signed it because a part of me still believed that acting as the reliable foundation would eventually earn me a seat at their table. Instead, it just made me the floor they walked on. Now, staring at the pending charge for a European vacation I was explicitly banned from attending, the reality of that signature crystallized. I was funding my own exclusion. This dynamic was not new. It was a pattern carved into the bedrock of our family long before corporate ledgers were involved. The glowing screen of my laptop seemed to fade, replaced by a memory from 14 years ago. I was 17 years old. It was a sweltering July afternoon in Delaware. I had just finished a double shift waiting tables at a local crab shack on the boardwalk. My uniform smelled like fried oil, Old Bay seasoning, and sour lemon. I sat in my beat-up sedan in the restaurant parking lot, counting crumpled single-dollar bills and sticky quarters. I spread them out on the passenger seat, sorting them into piles. I was not saving for a car or a college fund. I was counting out $342 to pay a final shutoff notice from Delmarva Power. I had found the bright pink envelope hidden under a stack of unread magazines on the kitchen island that morning. My parents had ignored it, prioritizing appearances over utilities. I drove to the payment center, handed over my entire week of summer tips in a wrinkled paper bag, and kept the lights on in a house that barely acknowledged I lived there. When I finally drove home that evening, exhausted and smelling of the fry vat, I walked through the front door, expecting silence. Instead, I heard cheering. I walked into the living room to find Vanessa sitting on the expensive rug. In her lap was a purebred golden retriever puppy wearing a massive red velvet bow. My father stood over them, beaming with pride, holding a breeder certificate. He looked like the ultimate provider, a successful patriarch, gifting his favorite daughter a $1,000 pet. I stood in the doorway, my hands still smelling of grease, the stamped utility receipt folded in my apron pocket. He did not ask how my shift went. He just told me to make sure I did not track dirt onto the carpet. That afternoon cemented the hierarchy. I was the designated adult, and Vanessa was the eternal investment. I blinked, pulling myself out of the memory and back to the quiet reality of my Wilmington office. The orange pending status blinked on the monitor. 14 years ago, I paid the bill to keep their lights on. Today, I was holding the switch. I moved the cursor over the transaction. The banking interface offered 3 options: approve, flag, decline. I did not hesitate. My index finger tapped the mouse pad. Decline. The orange text vanished, replaced by a red alert. Transaction denied. But I did not stop there. A decline charge could be retried. A decline charge could be explained away as a bank error or a fraud algorithm misfiring. I needed to send a message that could not be misinterpreted. I navigated to the Security Settings tab. I selected the option for the primary corporate card. I selected Freeze Account. The system prompted me for a secondary confirmation, warning me that all associated cards would be suspended immediately. I typed my administrative password and hit Enter. Account status, frozen. I picked up my phone from the desk. The screen was dark. I opened a new message thread directed at my father. My fingers moved over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. I did not write a paragraph. I did not express my hurt or demand an apology. I typed 6 words. "It is only for family, remember?" I pressed send. The reaction was instantaneous. Less than 30 seconds after the message delivered, my phone screen illuminated. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I watched the device vibrate across the glass desk, the soft buzzing sound filling the silent room. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. He was frantic. The travel agent was likely standing right in front of him, waiting for another form of payment. A payment he did not have. When I did not answer the 3rd call, the text messages started pouring in. They arrived in rapid succession, a digital barrage of panic and toxicity. First came the demands from my father. "Unlock the card right now. You are embarrassing me. Stop acting like a child." When those went ignored, Vanessa took over. Her messages followed her usual script, playing the victim while wielding guilt like a weapon. "How could you do this to us? Dad is having a panic attack because of you. You are ruining my mental health trip. You are so selfish." I read every single word as they scrolled across the locked screen. I felt no guilt. I felt no urge to defend myself. I walked into my pristine kitchen, opened a cabinet, and took out a heavy crystal wine glass. I poured a generous measure of a dry Cabernet Sauvignon. I walked back to the desk, picked up the vibrating phone, and switched the settings to Do Not Disturb. I placed it face down on the glass surface. The silence rushed back into the room, thick and satisfying. I took a sip of the wine, savoring the thrill of the retaliation. I had finally stopped funding my own disrespect. I prepared to close the laptop and enjoy the rest of my evening. The primary credit line was dead. The vacation was effectively canceled. I assumed the battle was over for the night. I was wrong. Right as my hand reached for the laptop lid, a new notification slid into the top right corner of the monitor. It was not a text message. It was a high-priority, encrypted email alert from the bank. The subject line read, "Action required. Wire transfer initiation." I set the wine glass down. The casual satisfaction evaporated, replaced by the sharp, hyper-vigilant focus of a corporate auditor. I opened the email. The notification detailed a request to wire a substantial sum of money, but the request did not originate from the frozen credit account. The origin account listed was the LLC Emergency Reserve Fund, a restricted account meant only for property taxes and catastrophic business liabilities. The system required dual authorization for a wire transfer of that magnitude, which is why the alert was sent to my inbox for approval. My father was not just trying to find an alternative way to buy plane tickets to Rome. Plane tickets do not require emptying an entire corporate reserve vault. He was actively attempting to liquidate the holding company's safety net. He was frantically trying to drain cash before I could look any deeper into the ledgers. I stared at the blinking cursor, the numbers on the screen forming a terrifying new puzzle. What is he so desperate to hide? The following morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky casting long shadows across the hardwood floors of my townhouse. I prepared a cup of black coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and finally took my device off the Do Not Disturb setting. The screen illuminated with 34 missed notifications. The psychological warfare had officially commenced. My father preferred to operate through direct intimidation. My mother weaponized guilt. They played their assigned roles with practiced perfection. I tapped the voicemail icon. My father's voice filled the quiet space of my kitchen. He did not sound like the polished country club president anymore. His tone was erratic, frayed at the edges. He demanded I reverse the freeze immediately. He accused me of trying to destroy our family reputation over a petty misunderstanding. He claimed Vanessa was suffering a severe panic attack because of my spiteful behavior, framing me as the villain in a crisis of his own making. When the audio message ended, a text from my mother chimed through. Her message was a masterclass in manipulation, carefully crafted to make me feel responsible for their emotional regulation. She wrote that I needed to unfreeze the accounts to keep the peace. She insisted that family forgives and that I was breaking her heart by being so calculating. Years ago, those messages would have worked. I would have felt the familiar, crushing weight of obligation. I would have apologized for reacting, unlocked the funding, and returned to my position as the silent workhorse. But I am a compliance officer. My entire career relies on stripping away emotional manipulation to uncover the structural truth beneath it. People lie. Ledgers do not. I set the device face down on the cool granite counter. I took a sip of my coffee and let my mind rewind to that seafood dinner. I looked past the cruel joke and sifted through the dialogue leading up to the insult, scanning the conversation for anomalies. Then I found the discrepancy. It was a brief, seemingly harmless complaint Vanessa made before our appetizers arrived. She had been sighing over her wine, complaining about the vendors who supplied her coastal boutique in Lewis. She called them difficult and unreasonable because 3 of her primary suppliers had suddenly switched her account terms to cash on delivery. At the time, my parents offered her sympathetic nods, treating the issue like a minor annoyance of small business ownership. To a forensic auditor, cash on delivery is not an annoyance. It is a blaring siren. Suppliers only revoke standard net 30 payment terms when a business has missed multiple invoices. They only demand cash up front when they believe the client stands on the brink of insolvency. Vanessa was not dealing with difficult vendors. Her retail boutique was bleeding out. I left my coffee on the island and walked straight into my home office. The attempted wire transfer from the previous night remained glaring at me from my inbox. My father was desperate for liquid cash, and he was willing to drain the emergency tax reserves to secure it. I needed to see exactly how deep the financial rot went. I powered up my workstation, preparing to bypass the surface-level accounts and dig into the encrypted archives of Phillips Coastal LLC. Before my fingers could touch the keyboard, the intercom panel on my office wall buzzed, a sharp grating sound that shattered the quiet morning. I lived in a highly secure building in downtown Wilmington. Access required a programmed fob and clearance from the front desk concierge. I pressed the talk button. The voice of the morning security guard crackled through the speaker. He sounded tense, his usual professional demeanor shaken. He told me my father was standing in the lobby demanding to be led up to my floor. The guard explained that Richard claimed there was a severe medical emergency involving my mother and that he needed to see me immediately. My pulse steadied. It was a classic escalation tactic. When digital intimidation fails, physical proximity serves as the next weapon. He wanted to trap me in my own space, to stand over me, and use his physical presence to force me into submission. He assumed the mention of a medical emergency would trigger a panic response, prompting me to override the building's security protocols. I pressed the intercom button again. My voice remained flat, entirely devoid of the panic he sought to provoke. I told the guard there was no medical emergency. I instructed him to deny entry. I stated clearly that if the man in the lobby refused to leave the premises within 2 minutes, security was authorized to call the Wilmington police and have him escorted off the property for trespassing. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The guard confirmed my instructions. I let go of the button. The interaction lasted less than 40 seconds, but it shifted the entire landscape of the conflict. This was no longer a dispute over a canceled luxury vacation. It transformed into a battle for total control. My father was realizing that the invisible scaffolding holding his life together had grown a spine, and the realization terrified him. He was willing to stage a public scene in a corporate lobby just to get his hands on my computer terminal. I turned back to my dual monitors. The encrypted files of the holding company required secondary authentication protocols. I bypassed the standard operating accounts. Those were the ledgers I balanced every month, the ones demonstrating clean property tax payments and routine maintenance for the beach house. They looked pristine because I maintained them that way. Instead, I routed my access into the back-end corporate banking portal, pulling the raw data feeds directly from the financial institution. I ran a customized filtering script searching for any financial activity linked to the company tax identification number that circumvented my standard approval alerts. The progress bar crawled across the screen. The room felt incredibly still, save for the low hum of the computer tower beneath my desk. I watched the data compile, piecing together the hidden movements of my family. The search query finished. A new window populated on my left monitor. It displayed a hidden sub-account, a shadow ledger nested deep under the primary corporate umbrella, shielded from the daily dashboard view. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the localized data fields. The account had been opened 6 months prior. The authorized signatory listed was my father. I scrolled to the right to view the current balance. My breath caught in my throat. The number staring back at me was not a minor overdraft. It was a staggering 6-figure negative balance. It revealed a commercial credit line drawn to its utmost limit, bleeding daily compound interest. The funds had not been spent on property repairs or holding company investments. The transaction history detailed hundreds of direct transfers feeding straight into the operating account of Vanessa's failing retail boutique. My father had not just insulted me at a seafood dinner. He had not just tried to buy a vacation using my credit. He had used the corporate seal to open unauthorized debt in my name to fund his favorite daughter's sinking vanity project. The man who cared about nothing more than his pristine community reputation was standing down in my lobby, unaware that I was looking at the exact digital footprint of his crimes. He was not just a toxic parent making bad decisions. He was actively committing felony fraud. Corporate fraud requires tangible proof. Digital records can be disputed in a courtroom. To lock the trap, I needed physical evidence connecting the shadow ledger to the real world. I closed my laptop, grabbed my car keys, and took the elevator down to the garage. The drive from Wilmington to Lewis takes roughly 90 minutes. Lewis prides itself on being the first town in the first state, a quaint historical enclave filled with Victorian architecture and tourists eager to spend money. Vanessa opened her retail store there 3 years ago. She named it Azure and Oak. The local Chamber of Commerce threw a ribbon-cutting ceremony. My parents bought a full-page advertisement in the regional lifestyle magazine. I was the one who reviewed the commercial lease, noting the exorbitant square footage rate, but my father told me to stop being a pessimist. I parked 2 blocks away from the storefront. The coastal wind whipped off the bay, carrying the scent of salt and fried seafood. I walked up the brick sidewalk and pushed open the heavy glass door. A bell chimed. The interior smelled of expensive jasmine candles intended to mask the scent of desperation. Vanessa was not on the sales floor. A teenage girl stood behind the marble counter, glued to her smartphone, barely registering my arrival. I kept my head down, wearing oversized sunglasses and a simple trench coat. I moved toward the back of the store, blending in as a casual browser. The displays looked curated at first glance. Silk blouses arranged by color palette, imported leather handbags resting on polished wooden shelves. But an auditor sees what a customer ignores. I picked up a ceramic vase. I did not look at the price. I flipped it over and looked at the supplier barcode. I slid my smartphone out of my pocket and snapped a clear photograph of the item tracking number. I moved to the clothing racks. I checked the interior tags. Several dresses lacked the standard designer tags, bearing cheap, generic replacements instead. The inventory was aging. Dust coated the lower shelves. Near the fitting rooms, a cardboard shipping box sat half open. I knelt down, pretending to inspect a pair of boots on the bottom rack. I zoomed my camera lens in on the packing slip taped to the side of the box. The vendor name matched one of the entities I saw in the hidden digital ledger earlier that morning. More importantly, the shipping terms printed on the slip read, "Cash on delivery." My suspicion at the seafood dinner was verified. Suppliers were cutting her off. How did my father secure the credit line to keep this failing operation afloat? Banks require strict verification for corporate accounts. They require operating agreements and formal resolutions signed by the managing members. I am the primary managing member of Phillips Coastal LLC. I never signed a resolution authorizing a shadow ledger. As I stood up from the boot display, the answer materialized in my memory. It was an object sitting on my father's mahogany desk in his home office, a heavy, antique brass corporate seal stamp. It belonged to my grandfather originally. My father kept it polished, treating it like a symbol of his patriarchal authority. He used to hold it up during his lectures on business, calling it his magic wand for red tape. He loved the archaic physical weight of it. Banks in Delaware still accept documents embossed with an official physical seal alongside a signature. He did not just forge my name on a digital form. He typed a fraudulent corporate resolution, forged my signature, and used that brass stamp to give the document the illusion of binding legal authority. He stamped his way into a six-figure debt trap. I walked out of the boutique without purchasing a single item. The teenage cashier did not even look up as the door chimed behind me. I walked back to my car, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I turned on the engine to get the air conditioning running, pulled my laptop from my tote bag, and opened it on the passenger seat. I tethered the computer to my cellular data network. I opened the encrypted financial files I downloaded that morning. I pulled up the photo gallery on my phone. The cross-referencing took less than 20 minutes. The tracking numbers and vendor names from my covert photographs aligned perfectly with the defaulted invoices in the shadow ledger. The boutique was not just failing. It was a financial black hole, consuming stolen corporate capital. The math told a flawless, irrefutable story. The $9,000 Amalfi Coast vacation was not being paid for with surplus profits. It was going to be funded by the fraudulent credit line. They were planning to drink wine in Italy on stolen money, leaving me legally responsible for the collapse when the creditors eventually came collecting. Anger is a useless emotion in my profession. Anger makes you sloppy. I felt an intense, icy clarity. I did not call my father to scream. I did not drive to their house to confront them. Confrontation gives liars a stage to practice their manipulation. I prefer to build a stage they cannot step down from. I created a new encrypted folder on my hard drive. I named it Operation Azure. I uploaded the photographs of the supplier tags. I matched them with the digital copies of the defaulted vendor invoices. I pulled the state filing documents for the holding company, highlighting the section that mandated my explicit signature for any new debt acquisition. I was assembling a bulletproof forensic file, a file designed to withstand the severe scrutiny of a grand jury. Every piece of evidence locked into place, forming a steel cage around my father's reckless actions. I drove back to Wilmington. The afternoon sun dipped low over the highway, casting a golden hue over the Delaware landscape. I felt a sense of control I had never experienced in my life. The invisible daughter was finally holding the reins. I parked in my secure garage and took the elevator up to my floor. I stopped at the mailroom to check my assigned lockbox. Nestled between utility bills and catalog advertisements was a stiff cardboard envelope. The postage indicated certified mail requiring a signature, but the front desk concierge had signed for it on my behalf. The return address belonged to a law firm located in a generic strip mall in a neighboring county. I carried the envelope into my townhouse, retrieved a metal letter opener from my desk, and sliced it open. I unfolded the heavy bond paper. The letterhead was ostentatious, utilizing a font that tried too hard to look established. The sender was an attorney named Greg Lawson. He represented my father. The text of the letter dropped the facade of family unity entirely. It was a formal cease and desist order. My father had hired a cheap lawyer to intimidate me into submission. The letter accused me of acting erratically. It stated that by freezing the primary corporate accounts, I was endangering the operational health of the holding company. Then came the ultimate threat. Greg Lawson wrote that if I did not release the holds on all banking accounts by Monday morning at 9 o'clock, he would file a civil lawsuit against me for breach of fiduciary duty. The audacity was breathtaking. The man who committed felony forgery to fund a failing boutique and a luxury vacation was threatening to sue me for failing to protect the company. He assumed I was a frightened girl who would cower at the sight of legal letterhead. He thought a threat from a strip mall attorney would force my hand. He did not realize that sending a legal threat over a frozen credit card merely handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his entire empire. The following morning, I carried the threatening letter into the heart of the Wilmington legal district. The contrast between my father and his chosen legal counsel became immediately apparent the moment I stepped off the elevator on the 30th floor of a high-rise overlooking the Delaware River. My father hired a lawyer from a strip mall to draft a cease and desist. I went to see Olivia. Olivia and I met 5 years ago during a complex corporate merger audit. She was acting as outside counsel for the acquiring firm, and I was the compliance officer who flagged a hidden tax liability that saved her client millions of dollars. Since that day, a quiet, mutual professional respect formed between us. She possessed a brilliant legal mind, characterized by a sharp, unsentimental approach to the law. We bonded over the shared experience of being women who are constantly expected to clean up the financial messes created by careless men. I walked into her corner office. The room smelled of polished mahogany and expensive espresso. She sat behind a sprawling desk wearing a tailored navy suit, her focus fixed on a thick stack of contracts. I did not offer small talk. I placed the cardboard envelope on her desk and slid the cease and desist letter across the smooth wood. Olivia picked up the heavy bond paper. Her eyes scanned the text, moving rapidly over the pseudo-legal jargon and the aggressive demands for me to unfreeze the holding company accounts. When she reached the signature line at the bottom, a dry, humorless smile crossed her face. She tossed the letter back onto the desk. She noted that Greg Lawson was a volume attorney, known for writing scary letters to frighten uninformed people into settling disputes out of court. She explained that the threat of suing me for a breach of fiduciary duty was a hollow intimidation tactic, especially since I possessed documented proof of the forged supplier invoices from the Coastal Boutique. I felt a brief wave of relief, but Olivia held up her hand. She warned me that dealing with cornered, desperate people required understanding their total exposure. She said we needed to know exactly how far the financial rot extended before we crafted our response. She turned to her dual monitors and accessed the Sussex County Property Records database. Delaware is famous for shielding corporate ownership, but physical real estate deeds and property liens remain public record. She typed in the tax identification number for Phillips Coastal LLC. She pulled up the deed for the historic Rehoboth Beach House. The beach house was the crown jewel of our family history. It was a sprawling, cedar-shingled estate sitting 2 blocks from the Atlantic Ocean. But it was also a monument to my unseen labor. 3 years ago, when a severe economic downturn threatened my parents' primary income, the mortgage on that beach house fell months behind. My father panicked. Rather than selling the property or downsizing, he came to me. He asked me to inject my own savings into the holding company to save their beloved summer home. I paid the arrears. I refinanced the note using my pristine credit profile. In exchange, the operating agreement was amended, granting me a 50% equity stake in the property. I earned that equity through silent, diligent payments, ensuring they never had to face the embarrassment of foreclosure. Olivia clicked on a subfolder in the county database labeled Encumbrances. Her face lost its relaxed demeanor. Her posture stiffened. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes tracing a newly filed document attached to the beach house deed. She turned the monitor toward me. My father had not just forged a corporate resolution to open a standard retail credit line. The document displayed on the screen was a commercial, hard money loan agreement. It was a predatory lending instrument issued by a private equity firm in New York, carrying an exorbitant interest rate. The loan was secured by a direct lien on the Rehoboth Beach House. The air in the office felt suddenly thin. The reality of the document hit me with the force of a physical blow. My father had secretly pledged the family beach house as collateral to secure the cash needed to keep Vanessa and her failing boutique afloat. He used the antique brass corporate seal to bypass my authorization, risking the very property I had spent years of my life paying for. If the boutique defaulted on this specific loan, the predatory lender had the legal right to foreclose on the beach house. My 50% equity, The financial security I built through endless overtime hours and meticulous saving was tied directly to the sinking ship of my sister. If I did nothing, I would lose my equity and my financial future. If I simply unfroze the accounts and let him pay the loan with the remaining corporate reserves, he would drain the holding company dry, and I would still be left holding the liability when the funds inevitably ran out. The tension in the room was palpable. Olivia shifted into a defensive posture. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. She outlined a standard legal strategy. She proposed drafting an emergency injunction to freeze all property transfers. She suggested filing a formal fraud report with the state attorney general to invalidate the hard money loan based on the forged signature. It was a textbook legal defense designed to shield me from the fallout. I stared out the floor-to-ceiling window, watching a cargo ship move slowly down the river. A standard defense meant years of litigation. It meant sitting in courtrooms, arguing with my parents, watching them play the victims while my resources were slowly drained by legal fees. It meant surrendering control to a judge. I did not want to play defense. I turned back to Olivia. I asked her a different question. I asked for the total payoff amount listed on the predatory loan. Olivia blinked, surprised by the shift in my tone. She checked the document and recited a figure. It was a substantial number, climbing well into the six figures, but it was not an impossible one. I do not live a lavish lifestyle. I drive a reliable, unassuming sedan. I live in a minimalist townhouse. I do not buy designer handbags or take luxury vacations to the Amalfi Coast. For a decade, I funneled my senior corporate salary into a highly aggressive, diversified investment portfolio. I possessed liquid capital that my family knew nothing about, simply because they never bothered to ask about my life. I told Olivia not to draft the defensive injunction. I told her to ignore the cease and desist letter from the strip mall attorney. Instead, I presented a strategy that was far more lethal. 5 years ago, I established a sterile, anonymous shell company in Delaware for an independent consulting venture that never fully materialized. The LLC sat dormant, carrying a clean tax record and zero public connection to my name. I instructed Olivia to contact the New York private equity firm that held the predatory loan on the beach house. Hard money lenders are notoriously pragmatic. They care about liquidity, not property management. They would gladly offload a high-risk loan if a buyer offered them a clean, immediate cash exit. I told her to use my anonymous shell company to purchase the debt. Olivia sat back in her leather chair. A look of profound realization washed over her face as she understood the architecture of my plan. By purchasing the commercial paper, I would not just neutralize the threat to my equity. I would become the primary lien holder on the Rehoboth Beach House. I would become the sole creditor holding the strings to Vanessa and her failing boutique. I would hold total, unyielding financial leverage over the father who tried to erase me. We mapped out the wire transfers. We prioritized the non-disclosure agreements to mask my identity during the acquisition. The strategy was flawless on paper, but executing a distressed debt purchase requires precise timing. The financial machinery had to move faster than my father could react. He gave me a deadline of Monday morning to unfreeze his accounts. I needed to own his debt before that clock ran out. I left the law office and walked back out into the bustling Wilmington streets. The pieces were in motion, but a lingering question shadowed my steps. Could the anonymous transaction clear the banking hurdles and secure the title assignment before my father realized his threats had triggered his own demise? Time functions as a weapon in financial warfare. It was Friday afternoon in Wilmington. The traditional banking cutoff loomed just hours away. If I wanted to secure the predatory loan before the weekend, I needed to execute the wire transfer immediately. But executing a complex commercial debt acquisition requires a static environment. I needed my father to stop his frantic maneuvering. If he sensed a counterattack, he might file a desperate temporary restraining order to freeze the holding company structure, complicating the title assignment. I needed him complacent. I needed him blinded by his own arrogance. I needed a distraction. To buy the necessary hours, I manufactured a digital decoy. I opened a blank document on my workstation and drafted an inquiry to a prominent bankruptcy consultant located in Philadelphia. I engineered the tone to sound frantic, defeated, and entirely devoid of my usual precision. I wrote that my personal credit profile was on the verge of collapsing. I stated that the frozen corporate accounts had triggered severe personal margin calls on my private brokerage accounts. I pleaded for an emergency consultation, claiming I possessed zero liquid cash and feared imminent ruin. I saved the fabricated plea for help as a portable document format file. I titled it Urgent Financial Restructuring Inquiry. Then I initiated the delivery mechanism. Phillips Coastal LLC utilizes a centralized cloud storage drive for tax preparation and receipt management. My mother holds the nominal title of corporate secretary. She contributes zero administrative value to the company. Her primary function involves monitoring the uploaded expense receipts to judge my personal spending habits and report back to my father. She thrives on snooping. It is her most reliable character trait. I uploaded the fake bankruptcy inquiry into the primary shared folder. I configured the cloud software to send a silent notification to my terminal the moment the file was accessed. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the Delaware sun cast long shadows across my glass desk. 22 minutes later, a gentle chime echoed from my speakers. The notification read, "User Susan downloaded the file." I could picture the scene unfolding in their coastal kitchen with vivid clarity. I envisioned my mother reading the desperate text. She loves tragic narratives, provided they happen to someone else. She likely rushed down the hallway to my father's home office, presenting the downloaded document as concrete proof of their triumph. By believing I was financially ruined and seeking bankruptcy protection, they would interpret my freeze on the corporate accounts as the flailing reflex of a broke woman. They would view it as a pathetic act of desperation rather than a calculated, tactical strike. They would stop consulting strip mall attorneys. They would uncork a bottle of expensive wine and celebrate my fabricated demise, lowering their defenses entirely. With their attention diverted, I pivoted to my secure financial terminal. The time for deception concluded. The time for execution arrived. I accessed my private wealth management portal. While my sister squandered her resources on designer inventory and my father chased country club prestige, I lived a life defined by strict, unyielding financial discipline. I drove a reliable sedan. I furnished my townhouse with understated pieces. I avoided luxury brands and ostentatious vacations. For a decade, I routed 60% of my net income into diversified index funds, municipal bonds, and high-yield growth portfolios. My wealth was silent. It accumulated in the dark, shielded from the greedy eyes of my family. I initiated a targeted liquidation of specific securities. The capital gains tax would hit my returns next spring, but the cost of acquiring my father's commercial debt was worth every penny. I transferred the resulting cash into the operating account of my dormant entity. 5 years ago, I established a sterile shell company named Apex Consulting Partners for an independent venture. It carried a clean tax identification number and left no digital footprint linking the entity back to Kendra Phillips. It was a ghost corporation, holding enough liquid capital to alter the trajectory of my family forever. I dialed Olivia on a secure conference line. She already had the managing director of the New York private equity firm holding on the other end. Hard money lenders operate without sentiment. They care exclusively about yield generation and risk mitigation. A distressed debt portfolio in a Delaware coastal town poses an administrative headache for a fast-paced New York firm. Olivia presented our offer with surgical precision. Apex Consulting Partners proposed to purchase the commercial paper securing the Rehoboth Beach House. We offered a full cash buyout, allowing the private equity firm to bypass any protracted foreclosure proceedings and exit the high-risk loan immediately. The managing director reviewed the numbers. He recognized a clean exit strategy. He agreed to assign the deed of trust to my entity the moment our wire transfer cleared their receiving department. I authorized the wire. Moving a sum of that magnitude through the Federal Reserve System on a Friday afternoon requires navigating heavy institutional friction. The banking portal displayed a spinning loading icon. The status text read, "Pending." The clock on my wall ticked closer to the 5 o'clock cutoff. The quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed to amplify in the tense silence of my office. My smartphone vibrated against the glass desk. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I did not answer. A moment later, a text message arrived. The tone of her message was entirely stripped of the toxic, frantic demands from the previous day. She adopted a cloying, condescending maternal voice. She wrote that she and Richard were deeply worried about my immense financial pressure. She stated that they wanted to help me navigate this difficult chapter. She offered to meet me for a forgiveness coffee tomorrow morning at a neutral cafe in Dover. She promised that we could figure everything out together. I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer delusion was breathtaking. She genuinely believed she had me cornered. She assumed the forgiveness coffee would serve as a formal surrender ceremony. She expected me to arrive broken, ready to hand over the holding company controls and validate the forged loans in exchange for a meager allowance to stave off my fake bankruptcy. It was a fake olive branch offered to a ghost. They thought they were reeling in a defeated daughter. They did not realize they were chumming the water for a shark. I ignored the text message. I kept my eyes locked on the dual monitors. The spinning loading icon on the banking portal finally stopped. The screen refreshed, pulling new data from the institutional server. The status text shifted from a cautious yellow to a bright, vivid green. Cleared. A fraction of a second later, my phone illuminated with a new encrypted text message from Olivia. I picked up the device. I read the words. 7 short words that shifted the tectonic plates of my family history permanently. The debt transfer is complete. You own them. Saturday morning in the coastal enclaves of Delaware belongs to a very specific demographic. It is a world of crisp linen shirts, manicured golf greens, and expensive bourbon poured over spherical ice. My father considered the local country club his personal kingdom. He prioritized his standing in that dining room above his actual net worth. Reputation served as his true currency. Following the discovery of my fabricated bankruptcy email, he walked into the clubhouse feeling invincible. He believed he had neutralized his ungrateful daughter and secured his financial dominance. He did not know I had ears inside that grill room. David, a senior partner at my compliance firm, happened to be enjoying a post-round lunch 2 tables away. David knew the intricate details of my holding company restructuring. He kept his head down, sipping his iced tea, and listened as my father held court with a group of local real estate developers. My father bought a round of premium drinks. He boasted loudly about a minor administrative headache regarding the family beach house. He spun a narrative painting himself as a shrewd businessman fending off predatory lenders. David sent me a real-time text message transcribing the monologue. My father told his peers that the original hard money lender sold the boutique debt to some faceless corporate entity. He leaned back in his leather chair, swirling his bourbon, and laughed. He promised his friends he would tie this anonymous shell company up in litigation for a decade. He swore he would bleed them dry in court until they settled for pennies on the dollar. Sitting in my Wilmington townhouse reading those text messages, a profound sense of poetic justice washed over me. The sheer, vibrant irony of his arrogance was breathtaking. He sat in a room full of influential men, loudly plotting to destroy a faceless entity, entirely unaware that the entity was the very daughter he mocked over a seafood dinner just days prior. He was digging his own social grave with a silver spoon. He thought he was playing a grand game of financial chess. He did not realize I already owned the board. I allowed him to enjoy his weekend of manufactured triumph. I let him bask in the applause of his peers. Then Monday morning arrived. I drove into my glass-walled office in the downtown financial district. I poured a cup of black coffee, sat at my workstation, and initiated the official execution phase. I did not send a polite email. I did not issue a gentle warning. Operating under the legal banner of Apex Consulting Partners, I generated a formal notice of default. The document detailed the exact sum of the commercial debt, the accrued interest, and the specific clauses violated by Azure and Oak. I attached the deed of trust for the Rehoboth Beach House as the active collateral. I dispatched a bonded legal courier to deliver the paperwork directly to the boutique in Lewis. The tracking software on my dual monitors mapped the courier vehicle traveling south along the highway. I watched the digital pin arrive at the storefront. 5 minutes later, the status updated to delivered. Signature acquired. The 30-day clock to foreclosure officially started ticking. The illusion of his country club victory shattered instantly. Panic operates on a very tight timeline when real money is on the line. Less than an hour after the courier secured the signature, my personal cell phone illuminated. The caller identification displayed my father. I let it ring 3 times to establish pacing. I pressed accept. He did not open the conversation with his usual commanding bark. He did not issue orders. He begged. His voice carried the high, thin frequency of a man watching his empire crumble. He explained that a ruthless corporate predator just served Vanessa a default notice. He laid out the dire stakes, explaining that the family beach house was tied to the loan. He still believed I was drowning in my own fabricated bankruptcy. He thought I was desperate, vulnerable, and eager to get back into his good graces. He pitched a unified front. He told me we needed to stand together to save the family legacy. He asked me to log into the holding company portal and authorize an emergency release of the LLC reserve funds. He wanted to use the tax reserves to hire a high-powered litigation firm to fight the default notice. I listened to him hyperventilate. I recalled the smirk on his face at the restaurant, the dismissive tone he used when he told me the luxury vacation was only for family. He excluded me when the sun was shining, but he demanded my labor the moment a storm rolled in. I responded with perfect professional detachment. I kept my vocal register flat and measured. I informed him that as the primary guarantor and managing member of Phillips Coastal LLC, I carried a strict fiduciary duty to protect the core assets of the holding company. I stated that releasing reserve funds to fight a legitimate debt collection on an insolvent retail boutique constituted severe financial mismanagement. I told him I could not authorize the transfer. He fell silent for a few seconds. The rejection confused him. He tried to pivot back to manipulation, reminding me of all the childhood sacrifices he supposedly made. I cut him off smoothly. I repeated my refusal, citing compliance protocols, and disconnected the call. With the financial avenue blocked, the fallout cascaded down to the golden child. Vanessa realized her safety net was gone. When her boutique began failing months ago, she blamed the local economy. When her suppliers demanded cash up front, she blamed shipping logistics. Now, facing total retail eviction, she turned to the only arena where she still held power. She took out her smartphone and opened her social media applications. I monitored her public profiles from my office. By late afternoon, she uploaded a new video. The production value was carefully orchestrated. She sat in the back room of her boutique, utilizing a ring light to highlight her tear-streaked face. She spoke directly to the camera in a shaking, fragile voice. She did not mention her plummeting sales, her unpaid invoices, or the fraudulent credit line keeping the lights on. Instead, she spun a vague, emotional narrative about toxic capitalism and predatory lenders destroying small, female-owned businesses. She begged her local followers to shop the store and support her dream during this dark season. She cast herself as a tragic heroine battling a faceless corporate villain. The comments section filled with sympathetic messages from community members who knew nothing about the forged documents or the stolen capital. She thrived on that hollow validation. It insulated her from accountability. I watched the video twice, analyzing her word choices. She genuinely believed her tears could pay her debts. While Vanessa performed for the internet, my father realized digital communication and emotional manipulation were no longer viable strategies. The corporate freeze on the holding company accounts remained absolute. My refusal to release the tax reserves blocked his only path to hiring legal defense. He felt trapped, cornered by systems he did not understand. But my father always considered himself the smartest man in any room. If the digital doors locked him out, he would simply walk through the physical front door. Just before 5 o'clock, my administrative dashboard pinged with an automated scheduling alert. The holding company profile was linked to the primary branch of our local bank in Rehoboth. The alert confirmed that an authorized user booked an in-person meeting for the following morning. My father scheduled a sit-down appointment with the regional bank manager. He intended to leverage his local reputation, walk into that coastal branch, and utilize his physical charm to bypass my digital locks. He planned to sit across from a manager he played golf with, spin a story about my supposed mental breakdown, and demand a manual withdrawal of the LLC reserve funds to save his sinking ship. He thought a firm handshake and a tailored suit could override federal banking regulations. Tuesday morning in the coastal town of Rehoboth brought a bright, clear sky. The local bank branch was not a towering financial institution composed of steel and glass. It was a colonial-style brick building where tellers knew their clients by their first names and asked about their grandchildren. This environment was my father's element. He thrived on relationship banking. For decades, he secured favorable interest rates and pushed through late payments by buying rounds of drinks at the country club and shaking the right hands. He genuinely believed his personal charm could circumvent federal banking regulations. He assumed a tailored suit and a confident smile could rewrite a balance sheet. He walked through the double-glass doors of the bank just after opening. Vanessa walked a half-step behind him. She clutched a designer handbag, her face arranged into an expression of delicate, fragile distress. They marched past the standard teller line and headed directly for the glass-walled office of Thomas, the branch manager. Thomas was a fixture in the local community. He played in the same weekly golf foursome as my father. He attended the same charity dinners. In the past, my father had successfully leveraged this exact relationship to waive overdraft fees for Vanessa when her boutique struggled during the off-season. He planned to use that social connection today to bypass my digital locks. They sat in the plush guest chairs across from the manager. My father leaned forward, utilizing his most reassuring paternal tone. He wove a masterfully deceptive narrative. He told Thomas that the family was dealing with an unfortunate private crisis. He claimed I was suffering a severe mental breakdown, citing the fabricated bankruptcy email as evidence of my deteriorating state. He framed the frozen holding company accounts as a tragic technical glitch caused by a sick, confused daughter. He asked Thomas for a quiet manual override to access the reserve funds. He framed the request as a personal favor between old friends. Vanessa chimed in on cue. She wiped away a dry tear, stating they just needed the capital to keep her retail store afloat while they sought urgent medical help from me. Thomas offered a sympathetic nod. He reached for his keyboard to pull up the Phillips Coastal LLC portfolio. My father relaxed in his chair, expecting to see a simple password lockout that Thomas could override with a manager key. I knew exactly what he was going to see instead. I built the barricade myself. As a senior compliance officer, I possessed direct channels to institutional fraud departments. When I initiated the default notice on the predatory loan, I also filed a suspicious activity report with the Regional Banking Authority. I provided them with the serial numbers from the boutique inventory and the forged corporate resolution. I triggered an automated defense protocol. Thomas typed his administrative credentials. The ambient hum of the air conditioning filled the silence of the office. Thomas stopped typing. His sympathetic smile dissolved. The color drained from his face, leaving a pale, uncomfortable mask. He stared at the monitor for a long time. My father noticed the shift. He asked if there was a problem, keeping his voice light and jovial. Thomas did not speak immediately. He rotated the flat-screen monitor around so it faced the guest chairs. The display did not show a routine error code. A bright red banner stretched across the interface. The text read, "Hard Corporate Freeze." Below that, a secondary alert flashed on the screen. "Felony Fraud Investigation Pending." Thomas cleared his throat. His eyes darted toward the closed office door, suddenly eager to put distance between himself and the man sitting across his desk. He explained in a hushed, nervous whisper that he could not process a manual withdrawal. He stated that the block was not a simple user error. The hold originated from a certified corporate compliance auditor. Furthermore, Thomas revealed the most damaging detail. He informed my father that the bank internal legal department had flagged recent transactions involving the holding company. They were currently conducting an active review regarding suspected forged signatures and the unauthorized use of a corporate seal on commercial loan documents. The air left my father's lungs. The jovial country club patriarch vanished. He was replaced by a terrified man stripped of his armor. In small coastal towns, reputation is the only currency that matters. Thomas was not just a bank manager. He was a social peer. Now Thomas was looking at my father not as a respected businessman, but as a potential criminal liability. My father tried to stammer out an excuse. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, a simple filing error that his lawyers would clear up. Thomas stood up. He politely but firmly asked them to leave his office. He stated he could no longer discuss the accounts without formal legal counsel present. He refused to shake my father's hand. They stepped out of the glass office and back into the main lobby. The reality of the situation crashed down on Vanessa. She realized the charm offensive had failed and the money was gone. Her carefully constructed facade cracked. Right there in the middle of the quiet, carpeted lobby, she lost her temper. She began shouting at my father. Her voice echoed off the brick walls, shrill and unhinged. She demanded to know how he let this happen. She yelled that she was going to lose her boutique and it was his fault for not handling me properly. Local patrons stopped filling out deposit slips. The tellers paused their counting. An older woman named Mrs. Gable, notorious for running the local neighborhood watch, lowered her reading glasses to watch the spectacle. Everyone in the building watched as the golden child threw a public tantrum, screaming at the respected patriarch. In a town built on whispers and appearances, this public meltdown was blood in the water. The gossip would reach the golf course before lunchtime. The illusion of the perfect family shattered on the bank floor, leaving behind a mess they could not sweep under the rug. I sat in my downtown Wilmington office observing the digital footprint of their failure. The bank system logged the rejected manual withdrawal attempt. I knew they had been turned away. I waited for the inevitable pivot. When arrogance fails, desperation follows. The pivot arrived at 2 p.m. My cell phone vibrated on my desk. A text message from my father appeared on the screen. The aggressive demands were gone. The condescension had evaporated. He sent 3 brief, defeated sentences. "We need to talk. Please. We are going to lose the beach house." He finally understood the gravity of his actions. He realized the Amalfi Coast was a distant fantasy, and his actual survival was on the line. He was begging for a lifeline. He thought he could pull me back into the fold with a plea for the family legacy. He thought the mention of the beach house would trigger my ingrained sense of obligation. He assumed I would revert to the girl who paid the electric bill with her waitressing tips. I looked at the text message and felt nothing but cold calculation. I picked up the phone. I did not offer reassurance. I did not engage in a debate about forgiveness or legacy. I dictated the terms of his surrender. I typed my response, setting the final trap. My office, Friday at 9 a.m. Bring Vanessa and Mom. I hit send. The board was set. They were walking blindly into a glass room where all their secrets were waiting. I locked my phone and turned back to my spreadsheets. The final execution phase was about to begin. Thursday evening settled over downtown Wilmington with a heavy, oppressive stillness. The daytime crowds retreated to the suburbs, leaving the financial district hollow and silent. Rain began to fall, tracing jagged paths down the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The ambient hum of the ventilation system provided the only soundtrack to the meticulous task I was undertaking. I stood over a polished granite credenza, assembling the architecture of my family's downfall. I arranged 3 identical black binders in a neat row. The leather covers felt cold and rigid under my fingertips. These were not standard corporate portfolios. They were execution blocks, constructed from bond paper and ink. Building a forensic accounting file requires a certain type of detachment. You cannot view the subjects as relatives. You must view them as variables in an equation that needs balancing. I opened the first binder and inserted the initial timeline. The The documents detailed every fraudulent transfer from the holding company reserve vault directly into the boutique operating accounts. Next came the high-resolution photographs of the inventory tracking numbers I captured in Lewis. Then I added the formal default notices for the predatory loan. I punched 3 holes into each page, the sharp mechanical crunch echoing in the quiet room. My hands moved with practiced rhythm, but my mind drifted back to a different stack of paperwork from a lifetime ago. I was 18 years old, sitting alone at a folding card table in my childhood bedroom. The room was poorly lit. I was filling out the free application for federal student aid using a blue ballpoint pen. I had to beg my parents for their tax returns for weeks. That same afternoon, my father walked past my open door. He did not ask if I needed help deciphering the complex interest rates. He did not offer to co-sign a reasonable loan. Instead, he held up a set of shiny silver keys, announcing he just leased a brand new convertible for Vanessa as a high school graduation present. He prioritized her luxury over my education. That day taught me a permanent lesson. Protection only comes from self-reliance. I learned to build my own safety nets because nobody was ever going to catch me if I fell. Now I was the one holding the safety net, and I was preparing to pull it away entirely. I turned my attention to the center binder. It required a special edition. During a routine maintenance visit to my parents' coastal house weeks ago, long before the seafood dinner in Rehoboth, I noticed an item sitting on my father's desk: the heavy, antique, brass corporate seal, the physical stamp he used to give unauthorized documents the illusion of legal weight. I knew it did not belong in a residential study. I slipped it into my handbag. He never even noticed it was missing. He relied so heavily on the illusion of his authority that he forgot to keep track of the actual mechanics of it. I retrieved the heavy brass object from a locked drawer in my desk. The metal was cold. I placed it inside a custom velvet-lined compartment built directly into the front cover of his specific binder. It was the physical manifestation of his fraud waiting to be revealed. The heavy glass door of my office swung open. Olivia walked in holding a ceramic mug of green tea. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, her expression sharp and focused. She approached the credenza and inspected the aligned binders. She set her mug down and confirmed the legal perimeter we established earlier that afternoon. The parameters were rigid. There would be no negotiations. There would be no emotional appeals. She informed me that her paralegal already drafted the formal submission package for the Delaware Attorney General. The courier was on standby. If my father refused the terms I was about to present, or if he attempted to stall the proceedings, Olivia would send a single text message. The courier would deliver the unredacted forensic file to the state prosecutors. The civil dispute over a beach house would instantly transform into a criminal indictment for felony forgery and wire fraud. We were removing his ability to maneuver. He was stepping onto a chessboard where I already captured his king. The trap was flawless, but cornered animals often attempt to chew off their own limbs to escape. The resistance began at 6 o'clock on Friday morning. The sky outside my townhouse window resembled bruised slate. The coastal humidity hung thick in the air, promising a miserable, sharp rain. My smartphone vibrated on my nightstand. A text message from my mother illuminated the dark room. The message was erratic, typed with poor grammar and desperate punctuation. She claimed Vanessa was suffering a severe anxiety crisis. She wrote that my sister was vomiting in the guest bathroom, unable to catch her breath, and physically incapable of enduring the drive up the highway to Wilmington. My mother begged for a postponement. She pleaded for a few days to let the emotional temperature lower. This was their classic evasion tactic. Whenever accountability loomed, Vanessa developed a convenient medical emergency, forcing the entire household to halt and cater to her fragility. In the past, this strategy shielded her from failing grades, broken leases, and unpaid bills. My mother expected me to fold. I picked up the phone. I did not offer sympathy. I typed a single, unyielding response. The meeting begins at 9 o'clock sharp. All 3 of you must be present in the room. Failure to appear will result in immediate legal escalation. I hit send. and walked into my bathroom to shower. I could only imagine the chaotic scene unfolding in their coastal home following my reply. My father could no longer afford to indulge the golden child. Her panic attacks were useless against a pending felony charge. For the first time in his life, he had to force his favorite daughter to face the consequences of their shared actions. He could not protect her. He had to use her as a shield to save himself, dragging her out the door and forcing her into the passenger seat. The unified family facade was fracturing under the immense pressure. I arrived at my firm an hour early. I wore a structured black dress and a sharp ivory blazer. I wanted the visual contrast to be striking. I carried the 3 black binders into the primary executive conference room. The room was situated on the top floor of the building. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the gray, rain-soaked city below. A sprawling mahogany table anchored the space, surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs. The environment was designed to intimidate. It was a space where corporate futures were decided and hostile takeovers were finalized. It lacked any warmth. I took my seat at the head of the long table. I placed the 3 binders in front of me, aligning the edges perfectly parallel to the wood grain. I placed my phone face down. I folded my hands together, and I waited. The digital clock on the wall shifted to 8:55. The silence in the room stretched taut and vibrating. A soft chime echoed from the hallway. The executive elevator had arrived. Footsteps moved across the plush carpet outside the glass walls. The tempo was slow, hesitant, devoid of any confident rhythm. The heavy oak door to the conference room opened inward. Our firm receptionist stepped aside, gesturing for the guests to enter. My father walked in first. The country club swagger that defined his entire persona was entirely absent. His shoulders slumped. His tailored suit looked rumpled as if he had slept in it. My mother followed close behind, clutching her designer purse to her chest like a flotation device. Her eyes darted around the imposing room, wide and terrified. Vanessa trailed them both. The golden child looked physically diminished. Stripped of her flattering boutique lighting and her social media filters, she appeared pale and exhausted. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a chair near the far end of the table. They did not speak. They did not offer a greeting. They sat down in a row, looking incredibly small, entirely out of their element, and utterly terrified. The ocean level had shifted. They were drowning, and I was the only person in the room holding a life raft. The silence inside the glass conference room felt thick enough to suffocate. Outside, the Wilmington sky unleashed a steady, driving rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the cityscape into gray streaks. The ambient drone of the building ventilation system hummed in the background. My father could never tolerate silence. In his world, a quiet room meant he was losing the audience. He adjusted his posture, shifting his weight in the ergonomic leather chair, attempting to summon the charismatic patriarch persona that served him so well at the country club. He smoothed the lapels of his wrinkled suit and offered a brittle, patronizing smile. He began to speak in a low, measured tone, crafting a monologue centered on family unity. He used words like misunderstanding, stress, and temporary hurdles. He framed my sudden freeze on the holding company accounts as a rash, emotional reaction to a simple scheduling error regarding the Amalfi Coast vacation. He told me that blood mattered more than bank balances. He actually pitched the idea that we should forgive each other, shake hands, and return to normal, as if the events of the past week were merely a bad dream. He looked around the imposing boardroom, assuming the corporate environment intimidated me. He believed that if he spoke with enough authority, I would shrink back into my designated role as the silent, compliant workhorse. I allowed him to speak for exactly 60 seconds. I monitored the second hand on my wristwatch. When the minute expired, I raised my right hand, holding my palm flat. It was a quiet, precise gesture that halted his monologue mid-sentence. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward and pushed the 3 black execution binders across the polished mahogany table. One stopped directly in front of my father, one in front of my mother, and the final one in front of my sister. I instructed them to open the covers and turn to the first tab. My father hesitated, staring at the leather binding like it might burn his fingers. He flipped it open, his eyes locked onto the printed digital ledger, tracing the exact transaction history of his unauthorized commercial loan. As he read, I reached into the velvet-lined compartment built into my personal binder. I retrieved the heavy, antique brass corporate seal. The metal clunked dully against the hardwood table as I set it down near his trembling hands. I informed him that financial institutions in Delaware still accept physical seals alongside signatures for major credit authorizations. I explained that using this specific heirloom to validate a forged corporate resolution elevated his careless financial mistake into a documented felony. His jaw tightened. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving a stark, pale hue. Vanessa broke first. The stark reality of the paperwork shattered her delicate, curated facade. She began to weep, loud, hiccuping sobs echoing off the glass walls. She covered her face with her hands, playing the familiar role of the helpless victim. She cried out that she did not know the money was stolen, that her coastal boutique was her entire life, and that I was punishing her for trying to follow her dreams. In the past, those tears would have commanded the room. My parents would have rushed to comfort her, turning their collective anger toward whoever upset their golden child. Today, nobody moved. I looked at my sister watching her perform. I kept my vocal register flat and clinical. I told her to stop crying. I stated clearly that tears do not balance a ledger, nor do they pay back predatory lenders. The coldness of my response shocked her into a stunned silence. She lowered her hands, staring at me as if I were a stranger. She finally realized her emotions carried zero currency in this room. I turned my focus back to my father. I told him we needed to discuss the allocation of the stolen funds. I instructed everyone to turn to the third tab in the binder. My father flipped the page, his breathing growing shallow. My mother leaned over to read his copy. I watched her eyes scan the highlighted paragraphs. For 3 decades, Susan operated as a loyal accomplice to Richard. She hosted garden parties, organized charity auctions, and judged every other marriage in our coastal zip code. Her entire identity hinged on being the respected wife of a successful patriarch. She stood by him because she believed their partnership was built on mutual superiority. She was about to discover how wrong she was. I explained that the hard money loan taken against the Rehoboth Beach House totaled a specific 6-figure amount. However, my forensic audit of the shadow ledger revealed that the boutique only received a portion of that capital. There was a $40,000 discrepancy. My father froze. His eyes darted toward the conference room door, measuring the distance to an exit. I did not let him speak. I continued reading the data. I revealed that he skimmed $40,000 off the top of the forged loan. He did not put that money into the retail business. He wired it to a real estate escrow account in Miami. He used the stolen capital to place a down payment on a secret luxury condominium in Florida. He secured a private escape hatch for himself, preparing to abandon his wife and daughters to deal with the sinking ship in Delaware. The room imploded. The illusion of family loyalty evaporated in a fraction of a second. Susan turned to her husband. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, vicious rage. She did not care about the forgery or the default notices. She cared about the betrayal. She realized he was planning to leave her penniless while he retired in the sun. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and began screaming at him. She called him a liar and a coward, hitting his shoulder with her designer purse. My father cowered, trying to deflect her blows, stuttering out pathetic excuses about needing a quiet investment property for their future. Their perfect country club marriage dissolved right there in the boardroom, exposing the hollow, selfish core of their existence. I let them fight. I watched the chaos unfold, sipping my glass of water. When their shouting reached a fever pitch, I picked up a glass paperweight and tapped it once against the mahogany table. The sharp crack cut through the noise. They stopped panting, turning their attention back to the head of the table. I reminded them that the Florida condo was a minor issue compared to the immediate threat. I slid one final sheet of paper forward. The document did not feature the Phillips Coastal letterhead. It bore the insignia of Apex Consulting Partners. I instructed my father to read the notice of assignment. He picked up the single sheet. His eyes scanned the legal text. His lips moved slightly as he processed the words. The document certified that Apex Consulting Partners purchased the commercial debt from the New York private equity firm. The entity now held the primary lien on the family beach house. I watched his brain try to connect the dots. I saved him the trouble. I informed him that I am the sole owner of Apex Consulting Partners. I explained that I was not just their daughter anymore. I was their sole creditor. If they missed a single payment, I possessed the legal right to foreclose on the Rehoboth property, seize the remaining assets of the Coastal Boutique, and liquidate their entire curated lifestyle. The Amalfi Coast vacation money he tried to steal was pocket change compared to the debt I now controlled. I held the keys to their total financial ruin, and I bought those keys with the very wealth they ignored for a decade. The paperwork slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the floor. Richard went pale, a deep, sickly white. The realization hit him with physical force. He had zero leverage. The community reputation he prized above his own children, the antique brass stamp he used as a weapon, the patronizing speeches he delivered at dinner tables, none of it mattered anymore. He was a bankrupt man sitting in a room owned by the daughter he tried to erase. He swallowed hard. He stammered, his voice cracking, asking me what I want. I leaned forward, planting my elbows on the mahogany table. My eyes locked on him. I kept my eyes locked on the man sitting across from me. He was a hollowed-out version of the patriarch who walked into a seafood restaurant just 4 days ago. The country club bravado had vanished, replaced by the shivering reality of a trapped animal realizing the cage door just clicked shut. He stammered again, asking what it would take to make the debt disappear. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the precise, unyielding cadence of an auditor reading a final balance sheet. I informed him that I was offering a singular, non-negotiable settlement. Option A involved Olivia sending a text message to our bonded courier, delivering the unredacted forensic file to the Delaware Attorney General. That path guaranteed a felony indictment for wire fraud and forgery, followed by a very public criminal trial that would strip him of his freedom and his prized reputation. Option B required him to sign a quitclaim deed in lieu of foreclosure, transferring his remaining 50% equity in the Rehoboth Beach House directly to me, effective immediately. He blinked his mind, struggling to process the stark binary choice. I did not give him time to recover. I turned my attention to the far end of the table, focusing on my sister. I outlined the terms for the golden child. Vanessa would sign a formal dissolution of her retail operating agreement right here in this conference room. She would surrender the commercial lease in Lewis by the end of the business day, returning the keys to the property management firm. Her vanity project was finished. She would no longer drain capital to pretend she was a successful entrepreneur. My father gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. He shook his head, a weak gesture of defiance. He argued that the coastal property was his legacy. He claimed he spent 30 years building that estate, cultivating a respected standing in that specific neighborhood. He pleaded that I was erasing his life work, stealing the one tangible asset that defined the Phillips family name among the local elite. His definition of legacy always disgusted me. Growing up, my father measured his self-worth in square footage and property lines, rather than character. When I was 12 years old, a severe storm damaged the roof above my bedroom, causing a steady leak that warped my floorboards. Instead of fixing it, he spent his entire annual bonus constructing a custom cedar deck for the backyard solely to host a lavish 4th of July party for local politicians and real estate developers. He prioritized the appearance of wealth over the actual structural integrity of his own home. His legacy was always a hollow facade built on neglected foundations. I leaned closer, resting my elbows on the polished wood. I reminded him of his luxury itinerary. I pointed out that his precious legacy did not stop him from planning to drink expensive wine on the Amalfi Coast while leaving me to absorb a crippling commercial debt. I told him he was perfectly willing to let my pristine credit score collapse to fund his European vacation. He gambled his legacy the moment he picked up that antique brass stamp and forged my signature. I was simply collecting the wager. Susan reached across the table, her manicured fingers trembling. Her expensive makeup was smudged, revealing the deep lines of stress she usually hid behind expensive cosmetics. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. For 3 decades, she protected the status quo, shielding her husband and her favorite daughter from accountability, because it guaranteed her a comfortable life of garden parties and charity luncheons. She realized her social currency was evaporating into thin air. She pleaded with me using a trembling voice. She begged, saying, I could not do this to my own family. She insisted that blood required forgiveness, urging me to find a softer path that did not leave them ruined. I looked at her, then shifted my gaze back to my father. I let a slow, practiced expression spread across my face. I mirrored his exact expression from the restaurant in Rehoboth Beach. I tilted my head, offering a cold, deliberate smirk. It is only for family, I replied softly, and this business is mine. The silence in the glass-walled room became heavy, dense, and absolute. The driving rain outside seemed to amplify the quiet devastation inside. The fight drained out of my father entirely. The realization that charm manipulation and parental authority held zero jurisdiction here finally broke him. I nodded toward Olivia. She stepped forward smoothly from the corner of the room. She opened a sleek leather portfolio and produced the drafted legal documents. She laid the quitclaim deed in front of my father. She placed the commercial lease surrender in front of my sister. Next to the paperwork, she set down an official Delaware notary stamp and a heavy silver fountain pen. Olivia stood tall, functioning as an impartial witness to their surrender. My father stared at the pen for a long time. His chest heaved with shallow, uneven breaths. He looked at his wife, who had buried her face in her hands, weeping silently. He looked at Vanessa, who was staring blankly at the wall, paralyzed by the loss of her curated retail identity. Finally, his hand hovered over the table. Shaking visibly, his fingers wrapped around the silver barrel. He pressed the nib to the thick paper and endorsed the transfer deed, signing away his empire, stroke by painful stroke. When he finished, he slid the pen toward Vanessa. She flinched as if the silver instrument might burn her. She picked it up, her tears leaving faint watermarks on the lease surrender document as she traced her name on the dotted line. Olivia collected the paperwork. She reviewed the signatures for accuracy, then pressed her official notary seal onto the pages, creating a sharp, definitive thud that echoed off the glass walls. The legal severance was complete. The holding company, the historic real estate, and the commercial leverage now belonged entirely to me. I stood up from the head of the mahogany table. I buttoned my ivory blazer, projecting total authority. I looked down at the 3 people who spent my entire life treating me like an invisible afterthought. They were now tenants in a world I owned. I delivered the final logistical parameter. I informed them that the unredacted forensic accounting file remained secure on my encrypted server. Our bonded courier was scheduled to deliver a physical copy to the Attorney General on Sunday afternoon at exactly 5 o'clock. I told them they had until 4:59 on Sunday to remove their personal belongings from my beach house. If I arrived at the property and found a single piece of their luggage remaining, or if they attempted to damage the fixtures on their way out, the courier would be dispatched. My father looked up, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. He realized this was not a negotiation. It was an eviction. The countdown clock was officially ticking, and they had less than 48 hours to pack up their entire curated existence and run. Sunday afternoon arrived with a crisp coastal breeze. I navigated my sedan southward along Route 1. The transition from the dense urban grid of Wilmington to the sprawling wetlands of Sussex County always provided a mental shift. Today, the drive felt like a victory lap. The tourist season had waned, leaving the highway empty and quiet. I rolled the windows down, letting the salt air fill the cabin. I was not driving down to perform an eviction. An eviction requires court orders, bailiffs, and prolonged legal wrangling. I was driving down to supervise a desperate flee. My family was running from a ticking clock. If they remained inside the property limits past 4:59, a courier would hand a forensic fraud dossier to the state prosecutors. The threat of a felony indictment proved far more effective than any civil eviction notice. I turned onto the familiar tree-lined street in Rehoboth Beach. The neighborhood was characterized by manicured lawns and wealthy retirees enjoying their quiet weekends. My historic cedar-shingled property stood at the end of the cul-de-sac. 2 large sport utility vehicles were parked haphazardly on the front lawn, their rear hatches open to the sky. Tire tracks scarred the pristine grass my father used to obsess over. He once spent an entire summer meticulously reseeding that lawn, screaming at landscapers who missed a single weed. Today, he was destroying it with his own tires, prioritizing speed over aesthetics. I parked my car on the street, turned off the ignition, and walked up the front steps. I did not knock. I turned the brass knob and pushed the heavy oak door open. The interior of the estate was a landscape of pure, unadulterated panic. Cardboard boxes littered the hardwood floors. Rolls of packing tape shrieked as they were pulled tight across loose cardboard. My father rushed past the foyer carrying a stack of winter coats. His face was flushed red, covered in a sheen of terrified sweat. He wore old sweatpants and a stained undershirt, a jarring departure from his usual tailored country club attire. He refused to make eye contact with me. He kept his head down, retreating into the hallway. For 3 decades, he dominated every room he entered through sheer volume and intimidation. Now he was scurrying through his former castle like a frightened pest. I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms across my chest, operating as a calm, silent observer. The visual contrast in power was stark. I stood still, rooted in total security, while the people who spent 30 years minimizing my existence frantically dismantled their curated lives. The Amalfi Coast vacation they tried to fund with stolen capital felt like a distant, absurd illusion. That fake European dream was shattered. It was replaced by the hard, tangible equity of the Delaware real estate I now protected. Vanessa emerged from the primary guest suite. She dragged a large reinforced moving box across the hallway runner. The friction made a terrible scraping sound. The box overflowed with designer shoes, expensive leather boots, and velvet heels she purchased during her various retail spending sprees. She breathed heavily, struggling under the physical weight of her own vanity. She looked up and noticed me watching her, her face contorted into a mask of bitter resentment. She stopped dragging the heavy box and stood up straight, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. She glared at me, her eyes red and puffy. She told me I was going to be miserable. She stated that having a big house meant nothing if I had nobody to share it with. She predicted I would end up entirely lonely, sitting in empty rooms with my spreadsheets while they rebuilt their family bond elsewhere. She wanted to land a final emotional punch. She needed to believe my success came at the cost of human connection. I did not argue with her. I did not point out that their family bond was built on fraud, theft, and mutual delusion. I simply stood there, my expression flat and impassive. I watched her wait for a reaction that was never going to arrive. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. When she realized her spiteful remark failed to penetrate my armor, her shoulders slumped. Defeated, she bent back down, gripping the cardboard edges, and resumed dragging the heavy box of shoes toward the front door. I stepped aside just enough to let her pass, listening to her grunt with exertion as she struggled to lift the burden over the threshold. I moved deeper into the house, walking toward the formal dining room. My mother was frantically wrapping items in old newspaper. Susan always defined her self-worth through material possessions. Her social status hinged on her ability to host elegant dinner parties using expensive inherited artifacts. She was currently wrapping a silver candelabra, stuffing it into a canvas tote bag. I allowed her to take the personal items. Clothes, jewelry, family photographs, those held no financial value to the holding company. Then I noticed her moving toward the dining table. She grabbed the back of an antique mahogany dining chair. It was part of a set of 12, a highly valuable collection purchased years ago from a high-end estate auction in Annapolis. She began dragging the chair toward the kitchen door, intending to load it into the back of her vehicle. I stepped into the dining room. I cleared my throat, a sharp sound that stopped her in her tracks. She spun around, her eyes wide with caught guilt. I pointed to the chair. I informed her that the dining set was purchased using holding company funds 4 years ago as a designated staging asset for the property. I recited the exact tax depreciation schedule from memory. I told her the chairs were registered corporate assets belonging to Phillips Coastal LLC. They were not personal property. Susan gasped, her grip tightening on the carved mahogany wood. She argued that she picked them out herself. She pleaded that she needed them for her new place, claiming it was the only piece of decent furniture she had left. She tried to summon tears, attempting to use her maternal fragility to manipulate the situation. I shook my head slowly. I raised my left wrist, tapping the glass face of my watch. I announced the current time. It was 4:30. I reminded her that the state prosecutors did not care about her interior design preferences. I told her to put the chair back at the table. Her hands shook. She looked at the chair, then looked at my cold, unwavering expression. She realized I was perfectly willing to send her husband to prison over a piece of furniture. She let go of the wood. The chair settled back onto the rug with a soft thud. She grabbed her canvas tote bag and hurried past me, fleeing toward the garage without looking back. The final 20 minutes dissolved into a blur of frantic, panicked labor. They shoved garbage bags filled with clothing into the back seats of their vehicles. They abandoned half-packed boxes in the living room, realizing they ran out of time. At exactly 4:45, my father slammed the tailgate of his sport utility vehicle shut. He stood in the driveway, staring at the historic home he just lost. He looked old, defeated, and stripped of all his coastal prestige. He did not say goodbye. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and reversed out of the driveway, the tires squealing against the asphalt. Vanessa followed closely behind in her own car, peeling out onto the quiet neighborhood street. I watched their taillights disappear around the corner. I stepped back inside the foyer and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt, locking it with a resounding, satisfying click. The sudden silence inside the house was profound. It was not a lonely silence. It was the sound of unshakable security. I owned the walls, the roof, and the ground beneath it. The toxic noise that plagued my entire existence was finally gone. I walked out to the back deck, taking a deep breath of the ocean air, feeling a sense of true peace. But the quiet isolation of the beach house was a stark contrast to the loud, chaotic social collapse about to hit them. Stripped of their corporate backing, their carefully curated reputation in the tight-knit Delaware community was sitting on a powder keg, and the fuse was already lit. The coastal towns of Delaware operate on a very specific social currency. In places like Lewis and Rehoboth, your actual net worth is secondary to your perceived stability. Rumors travel faster than the ocean tide, and the sudden closure of a prominent retail storefront creates a vacuum that gossip quickly fills. On Monday morning, the commercial property management firm arrived at the location formerly known as Azure and Oak. They carried power drills and new deadbolts. By noon, the elegant wooden sign bearing Vanessa's business name was unbolted from the brick facade and discarded into a nearby dumpster. The windows were covered with brown craft paper. In the past, my father would have managed this public relations crisis with a flurry of checkbooks and charming phone calls. He would have hosted a dinner, spun a tale about seeking a better venue, and smoothed over the cracked facade. But the holding company funds were locked behind my firewall. He had zero capital to fuel his illusions. On Wednesday afternoon, Richard attempted to reclaim his territory. He dressed in a crisp linen blazer and drove to his exclusive country club. He needed to project strength. He walked into the grill room, a space defined by dark oak paneling and leather booths. He approached the polished brass bar and ordered his usual premium bourbon. He spotted a group of local real estate developers and retired executives sitting near the bay windows. These were the men he spent decades courting. He walked over, carrying his drink, pasting a practiced, jovial smile on his face. He initiated the conversation, trying to steer the narrative before the whispers could solidify into facts. He waved his hand dismissively, telling the group that he and Susan decided to downsize their real estate portfolio. He used curated phrases, claiming the market was shifting and they simply chose to simplify their lifestyle. He chuckled, waiting for the familiar chorus of agreement and backslapping. The response was a chilling, echoing silence. The men at the table exchanged uncomfortable glances. Thomas, the bank manager who rejected Richard just days prior, sat at the edge of the booth. Thomas stared intently at his water glass, refusing to make eye contact. The other men offered tight, polite nods. One executive suddenly checked his watch, claiming he had an urgent conference call, and excused himself from the table. Another signaled the waiter for the check. Within 3 minutes, the group dispersed, leaving my father standing alone, holding his bourbon. His peers already knew the truth. Bankers talk to brokers, and brokers talk to investors. The story of the frozen corporate accounts and the desperate attempt to withdraw reserve funds had circulated through the locker room. They did not view him as a man choosing to simplify. They viewed him as a financial liability, a man drowning in undisclosed debt. In their world, failure is contagious. By the time Richard finished his drink, his social standing was bankrupt. The respect he valued more than his own daughters evaporated, leaving him stranded in a room full of ghosts. While Richard suffered a silent excommunication at the country club, Vanessa faced a far more tangible nightmare. The golden child was experiencing gravity for the very first time. For years, Vanessa treated the boutique as a personal closet. She utilized high-interest credit cards to fund her lavish wardrobe, her expensive lunches, and her curated social media aesthetic. She signed personal guarantees on those cards, always assuming the holding company would eventually step in to clear the balances. With the business dissolved and my father cut off from the corporate ledger, the creditors turned their attention directly to her. The collection notices began arriving daily. Her pristine credit score plummeted. She was drowning in residual personal debt, and she possessed zero marketable skills to generate income. She held a liberal arts degree she never used and a resume consisting solely of managing a failed vanity project. She needed cash immediately to prevent the repossession of her vehicle. Desperation forced her into the local job market. The commercial space she surrendered in Lewis did not stay vacant for long. The property manager quickly leased the prime location to an independent, hard-working local baker who spent years building a loyal following at regional farmers markets. The new tenant transformed the dark, pretentious boutique into a bright, bustling cafe filled with the scent of fresh sourdough and roasted espresso. The bakery needed staff. They posted a help wanted sign in the window. Vanessa, out of options and out of time, walked into the very building she used to command and filled out a job application. The owner, unaware of the bitter irony, hired her on the spot to run the front register. 2 weeks later, I drove down to Lewis to review some municipal zoning files for a client. The morning air was crisp. I parked my sedan near the historic district and walked down the brick sidewalk. I noticed the new bakery occupying the familiar storefront. I decided to step inside for a coffee. A bell chimed as I pushed the glass door open. The interior was unrecognizable. The expensive display shelves were replaced by rustic wooden counters lined with pastries. The pretentious atmosphere was gone, replaced by genuine warmth and the loud hiss of an espresso machine. I joined the short line of customers checking emails on my phone. I stepped up to the counter. I lowered my phone. Vanessa stood on the other side of the register. She wore a tan canvas apron over a plain white t-shirt. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot, devoid of the expensive salon styling she usually maintained. Her hands, once adorned with designer rings, were dusted with flour. She looked up to greet the next customer. Her eyes met mine. The color drained from her face. Her hands froze over the point-of-sale tablet. The humiliation radiating from her was almost a physical force. This was her ultimate nightmare. The sister she mocked, the sister she deemed unworthy of a luxury vacation, was standing in front of her wearing a tailored suit while she wore a minimum wage uniform in the exact spot where she used to pretend she was a chief executive. She opened her mouth, perhaps expecting me to deliver a cutting remark. She braced herself for the gloating. She assumed I would use this moment to twist the knife, to remind her of the seafood dinner, to publicly shame her in front of her new employer. I did none of those things. Gloating is a weapon used by the insecure. I felt no need to diminish her further. The universe had already executed the perfect penalty. I looked at the menu board. I kept my voice polite, even, and entirely professional. I ordered a large black coffee. Vanessa swallowed hard. Her hands shook as she tapped the screen to input the order. She croaked out the total, keeping her eyes fixed on the counter. I pulled a sleek leather wallet from my handbag. I retrieved my credit card and inserted it into the chip reader. The machine chimed, approving the transaction. I reached back into my wallet and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I folded it once in half. I reached across the counter and dropped the bill into the glass tip jar sitting next to the register. I looked her directly in the eyes one final time. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply offered a blank, unyielding gaze of total indifference. I took my cardboard coffee cup from the pickup counter, turned my back, and walked out the door into the morning sunlight. The silence I left behind was devastating. It was louder than any screaming match we ever had. I did not need to break her. She was already broken, trapped in a miserable reality she tried so desperately to force onto me. They were all living the nightmare they designed for my future. But cornered people rarely accept their fate gracefully. As I drove back toward Wilmington, I knew my father was sitting in his downsized rental, watching his empire turn to ash. A man stripped of his pride and his capital is a dangerous variable, and he was about to make one final reckless move to reclaim his throne. The cedar-shingled house in Rehoboth Beach required an immediate physical purge. Susan decorated the property to imitate a European villa, filling the rooms with heavy velvet drapes, faux Tuscan plaster, and gilded mirrors that reflected nothing but her own vanity. I hired a local contracting crew to tear it all down. I spent my weekends overseeing the demolition. We stripped the dark floral wallpaper. We ripped up the ornate, suffocating carpets to expose the original wide plank oak floors underneath. I instructed the painters to coat the walls in a crisp, clean white. I wanted the space to breathe. I wanted the ocean breeze to flow through the open windows without snagging on the ghosts of my family and their endless pretension. For years, I paid the mortgage while they dictated the aesthetics. Now the environment matched the owner. It was bright, structured, and firmly anchored in reality. I replaced the oversized, impractical dining table with a sleek, minimalist setup. I brought in modern, efficient appliances, removing the archaic fixtures my father insisted on keeping just because they looked expensive. Every swing of the contractor hammer felt like a physical severing of the past. The dark, heavy granite countertops were hauled away and replaced with bright quartz. Without the thick curtains blocking the acoustics, I could finally hear the rhythm of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the shoreline from inside the living room. This physical clearing mirrored a profound mental unburdening. For a decade, a significant portion of my cognitive bandwidth was hijacked by the constant need to monitor my father and his erratic financial schemes. I was always waiting for the next disaster, calculating how to quietly intercept the fallout. With that parasite removed, my professional capacity expanded exponentially. In Wilmington, my career trajectory shifted from steady to meteoric. During a quarterly risk assessment meeting in November, I presented a comprehensive audit of a regional healthcare merger. The boardroom was packed with senior partners and external stakeholders. I stood at the head of the table. I did not rely on charm or loud bluster. I delivered raw, actionable data. I identified a critical regulatory vulnerability that the opposing corporate counsel tried to bury in the appendices. The opposing lawyer, a man who shared my father's patronizing tone, attempted to talk over me. He claimed the compliance risk was negligible. I did not raise my voice. I recited the exact state statute and outlined the specific 7-figure penalty the firm would face if we ignored the hidden liability. I dismantled his argument with clinical precision. The senior partners listened in total silence. They did not interrupt. They took notes. 2 days later, the managing partner called me into his office and offered me the position of Senior Director of Compliance, complete with a corner office and an equity stake in the firm. I earned my seat at the table through undeniable competence, rather than demanding it through temper tantrums. I was holding genuine power built on a foundation of truth. The dichotomy between my ascent and my parents' rapid descent painted a vivid picture of cause and effect. Richard and Susan were forced to sign a lease on a cramped 2-bedroom condominium situated next to a noisy highway overpass in Milford. It was a town they previously mocked for lacking prestige. They no longer possessed a formal dining room to host their elaborate, superficial dinner parties. My father could no longer invite local politicians over for cigars on a custom cedar deck. They were reduced to staring at each other across a laminate kitchen counter, surrounded by the few boxes of belongings they managed to drag out of my beach house. The social isolation was suffocating them. Their former friends stopped returning their calls. The country club suspended their membership for unpaid dues. Susan now drove to a discount grocery store 2 towns over, terrified of running into women she used to judge at charity luncheons. My father spent his evenings sitting on a tiny concrete balcony, listening to the roar of highway traffic instead of the ocean waves. They were living the exact meager existence they always assumed I was destined for, while I was thriving in the light they tried to block out. People who spend their entire lives avoiding accountability rarely develop self-awareness in the face of ruin. My father was a man who believed consequences applied to other people. He assumed time functioned as an eraser, wiping away his transgressions, simply because the initial shock wore off. On a cold Tuesday morning in early December, an email landed in my private inbox. The sender address belonged to Richard. I sat at my new desk in my corner office sipping hot tea and opened the message. The text was a staggering display of cognitive dissonance. He did not offer an apology. He did not acknowledge the forged signature, the stolen equity, or the devastating confrontation in the glass conference room. Instead, he adopted a casual, breezy tone, as if we merely experienced a minor disagreement over holiday plans. He wove a pathetic narrative about a temporary cash flow issue. He claimed the transition to the new condo drained his liquid checking account, citing unexpected moving expenses and a delay in his consulting revenue. He asked for a small temporary loan of $4,000 to cover his December rent and utilities. He promised to pay me back after the new year, utilizing the exact same empty assurances he used when he drained the holding company reserves. He ended the email by stating he missed our Sunday phone calls and hoped we could put the past behind us. He thought the bond of blood would override my logic. He believed my ingrained habit of rescuing him would override my memory of his betrayal. He wanted to test the locks on the boundary I built. I read the email a second time to ensure I grasped the full depth of his delusion. I searched my chest for a single ounce of guilt. I waited for the familiar pang of obligation, the childhood reflex that compelled me to fix his mistakes to earn his approval. I felt nothing. The emotional well was entirely dry. I did not feel pity, and I did not feel rage. I felt the cool, sterile satisfaction of a scientist observing a predictable reaction in a petri dish. I did not type a reply outlining my boundaries. I did not send a scathing rejection to put him in his place. Responding to manipulation validates the manipulator. It signals that they still hold enough power to provoke an emotional reaction. The ultimate power lies in total, unyielding indifference. I moved my cursor over the top right corner of the email client. I clicked the archive icon. The message vanished from my inbox, filed away into the digital void, never to be opened again. The boundary was permanently sealed. My father was no longer a threat. He was just a spam message in my junk folder. I closed the email client and turned my attention back to the merger audit on my desk. But the silence I offered him was not a sign of inactivity. While he was begging for rent money to survive the winter, he remained oblivious to a profound financial storm gathering on his horizon. I had archived his plea for cash, but I had already finalized a different kind of paperwork. A federal document was currently moving through the United States Postal Service, carrying a 6-figure payload designed to ensure he paid for every single cent he ever tried to steal. Late July arrived on the Delaware coast, bringing warm evening winds and a sky painted in deep shades of violet and bruised orange. The cedar-shingled house in Rehoboth Beach glowed under the soft illumination of new, understated outdoor lighting. I stood on the renovated back deck, surrounded by the hum of genuine conversation. I was hosting a dinner party. The atmosphere stood in stark contrast to the rigid, performative gatherings my parents used to orchestrate on this exact footprint. There were no local politicians to impress. There were no real estate developers to court. The guest list consisted of people who valued loyalty over pedigree. Olivia sat at the outdoor dining table laughing as she shared a story about a recent courtroom victory. David, from my compliance firm, poured another round of wine discussing his upcoming sailing trip. The air smelled of sea salt, roasted garlic, and grilled salmon. Nobody was performing. Nobody was keeping score. For the first time in my adult life, I was hosting a table where I did not have to earn my seat by fixing someone else's disaster. I leaned against the wooden railing holding a glass of dry Pinot Noir, listening to the rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic Ocean in the distance. The peace I felt was profound, anchored by a finalized piece of paperwork I executed earlier that morning. While my guests arrived with bottles of wine and easy smiles, I spent my morning visiting the local post office to deliver a final, undeniable reckoning to a cramped condominium in Milford. I mailed my father a single sheet of paper. It was not a letter. It was not a legal threat. It was a standard federal tax document, Form 1099-C, cancellation of debt. The federal tax code operates on a very specific, unforgiving logic. When my anonymous shell company, Apex Consulting Partners, purchased the predatory commercial loan, I became the sole creditor. When I forced my father to sign the quitclaim deed in lieu of foreclosure, taking his 50% equity in the beach house, I technically forgave the remaining balance of the high-interest debt he accumulated to fund Vanessa's boutique and his secret Florida condo. Under the rigid parameters of the Internal Revenue Service, forgiven debt does not simply vanish into the ether. It is classified as taxable gross income. My father accrued a staggering amount of predatory interest. He skimmed capital. The total canceled debt equated to hundreds of thousands of dollars. By legally forgiving that balance to secure the property title, I triggered a mandatory reporting requirement. I submitted the forms to the federal government, notifying them that Richard Phillips received the equivalent of a multi-$100,000 income injection this fiscal year. The IRS now expects him to pay income tax on that phantom money. He thought he escaped the trap by signing the deed. He believed walking away from the coastal estate meant washing his hands of the financial ruin he created. He failed to realize that every signature carries a consequence. He is now facing a crippling six-figure tax liability. The beauty of this particular consequence lies in its inescapable nature. My father spent his entire life charming his way out of trouble. He manipulated bankers, he guilted his wife, and he used his daughters as shields. But you cannot charm the federal government. You cannot take a tax auditor to the country club and buy them a premium bourbon to smooth over a deficit. The IRS does not care about his fabricated reputation or his polished smile. They do not respond to panic attacks or dramatic tears. When he fails to pay that tax bill, the government will not send a cease and desist letter from a strip mall attorney. They will initiate severe, unyielding collections. They will place federal tax liens on any remaining assets he possesses. They will garnish his consulting wages. They will freeze his modest checking accounts. The financial cage he tried to build for me is now the exact prison he will inhabit for the rest of his natural life. I did not steal anything from him. I did not frame him. I simply held up a mirror to his own actions and handed the reflection to the federal authorities. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the cool liquid wash over my palate. I looked through the glass sliding doors into the bright, renovated kitchen. The tacky faux European decor was gone. The heavy velvet drapes were a distant memory. The space felt vibrant and alive. My mind drifted back to that Tuesday evening at the seafood restaurant, the starting line of this entire quiet war. I pictured my father sitting at the head of the table adjusting his silk tie. I saw the smirk forming on his face. I heard the exact cadence of his voice when he delivered the punchline. "It is only for family, without you." At the time, those words felt like a sharp, physical wound. It was the ultimate rejection, delivered with an audience designed to remind me that my labor would never purchase their affection. But standing on my deck, listening to the laughter of real friends, I realized that cruel joke was the greatest gift my father ever bestowed upon me. If he had simply invited me on that Amalfi Coast vacation, I would have packed my bags. I would have continued managing the holding company ledgers. I would have spent the next decade working endless hours to fund Vanessa's vanity projects and his superficial country club lifestyle. I would have remained the invisible scaffolding, slowly deteriorating under the weight of their endless demands. His cruelty was the catalyst for my liberation. By explicitly excluding me, he broke the spell of obligation. He forced me to look at the ledger of my own life. He forced me to realize that I was funding my own disrespect. Sometimes the people who push you out of their circle are doing you a profound favor, because the circle was a trap all along. Growth requires severance. It requires looking at the structures you built to survive your childhood and deciding to tear them down to build something better. That process is rarely comfortable. It demands hard choices and cold boundaries. Growth may disappoint those who benefited from your old boundaries, but it can still save your life. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, pulling the last streaks of purple light from the sky. The coastal wind picked up, carrying the fresh, clean scent of the open water. Behind me, someone changed the music playing through the outdoor speakers, prompting a new wave of easy, unburdened laughter from the dining table. I did not turn around immediately. I stood at the edge of the wooden railing, the deed to the property resting securely in a safety deposit box, the forensic files locked away, and the tax forms already processed by the Postal Service. The storm was over. The toxic noise that defined my youth was silenced permanently. I raised my glass toward the dark ocean, a silent toast to the invisible daughters who finally learned to keep the ledger for themselves. I smiled, a genuine, quiet expression of total victory, looking out over a horizon I owned entirely.